it got sort of naturally quiet, so I feel like that means it's time to start. So thank y'all for doing that. I was worried, like, how easy is it to quieten everybody down and get started, but y'all did a really good job. Yeah, like you've done this before. So, but it's good to see everybody tonight. By process of elimination, I bet you can figure out my name because we've had Jason Helton, we had Aaron Howell, Kim Walker, Mike. So that leaves me, Jonathan Barksdale. So this is my turn in the rotation tonight, and I actually have, I think, 2 of the next 3 weeks. I do tonight and then December 21st. I'm getting kind of a lot at once here. But so I'm going to be speaking to you tonight about another passage of strength. And a couple of things I wanted to share with you as we get started. I think these are so practical for us as we go through these verses. Just today, I went to the pharmacy to get a prescription, and there's a TV, and in the 2 minutes that I'm waiting on my prescription on, it's like Fox Business or something. There's a couple of headlines, and I just put them in my phone. I'm like, this is why we have to deal with these things. This is why we need strength. 2 headlines that came on while I was there said, number 1, Wall Street fear gauge climbs for the 3rd straight day. Next one said, economic uncertainty hitting market sentiment. I'm like, oh. You can't turn on the news without hearing the word crisis. 5 times while you're watching the news? Everything is a crisis, crisis, crisis. This person's in a crisis. You go to the internet, you look online, you do anything, there's those, clickbait things where they're wanting you to click, where it's all doom and gloom. And so we're inundated with it. And that's all external, right? That's not even the things that we're dealing with in our own lives that relate to illnesses, concerns over loved ones, drama, disturbances in relationships. The things that we deal with because we are imperfect people living in a world full of other imperfect people. And things happen. And it's tough to deal with. And so these passages, this study that we're doing, I have found it very beneficial. I'm sure you have as well, in going through these verses. And thinking about these types of verses like the joy of the Lord will be my strength, or the eyes of the Lord range about the earth, searching to strengthen the hearts of those who are committed to Him. Those types of verses are powerful and impactful if we really stop and consider what they're saying. And we have another one of those tonight. And so I was thinking about these verses, and for us, I think that all of these types of verses become things that we can truly recite and use as mantras in our own life, just almost constantly reciting them to ourselves. They can be life verses. They can be things that, as the Bible referred to, that we could literally almost go and right above the doorways and on our walls and throughout our home to go and see and focus on. Or it can also be our life playbook. And I thought I would really like to have one of these just in life, if you can see that. So this is a wristband like you see quarterbacks wear them with all their plays. And I love this. I would be a quarterback just to get to wear one of those wristbands with all the plays. You got our man Tom Brady right there going to the play sheet on his wrist. And I think that sometimes we could really benefit, from having something like that in life to go through and say, well, what do I need today? Okay, the Lord is my refuge and my strength. And reminding ourselves of those things in our daily life. So tonight we are going into chapter 4 in our book. The Strength You Need is the basis of this study. And we're going to be focused tonight in Psalms chapter 46, and specifically the target verse for the study, but we're going to go through more of Psalms 46, is this verse, the Lord is my refuge and strength and ever-present help in my time of need, or in time of trouble. So that's our verse tonight. We're going to be focusing on that, and we're going to look at a backdrop of this verse and try to understand possibly where this verse, or why this verse was written, what the purpose of it was, and to kind of juxtapose that against the story in the life of Hezekiah. When you consider the events of 2 Samuel 18 and 19 against the context of this verse, you can really see the power drawn out of this verse, and how God can work in mighty ways, and how we can take strength from that. We can draw strength from that. So Psalms 46 is a psalm of the sons of Korah. And in reading some things there, it suggests it doesn't necessarily mean that it was written by the sons of Korah, but it could have been in reference to written for the Levites, who in a sense were descendants of the sons of Korah or of Korah. It could be used or thought to be used as a national hymn. So when you take a psalm like this and you document that psalm, it could have been something that became like a national hymn or something to commemorate a significant event, something great in the nation of Israel. So this very well could have done that and been that. They think that it is very likely, or not suggested, scholars suggest, I shouldn't say likely, but scholars suggest that it could have been used in part with reference to 2 Kings 18 and 19. Because the language of the psalm is similar to some of the language of Isaiah, who lived during the time of Hezekiah, and some of the references and kind of the metaphors in this psalm can kind of speak back to some things that happen in 2 Kings 19, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So that's kind of just a backdrop or an overview of this. What is happening if we consider that this is going to speak to 2 Kings 18 and 19, or an event there, or if we just want to look at that as something to pair with this chapter of Psalms 46, what is happening in 2 Kings 18 and 19? Well, you'll know at this time Hezekiah has taken to the throne in Judah. Hezekiah has been on the throne for 4 years when Israel falls. Assyria, a mighty nation, comes in, and as we know, they utterly destroy Israel. They take Israel away because of the evil in Israel. They lay siege to their cities. They lay siege to Samaria for 3 years and then take them away into captivity. So a few years pass, and what we see is that I think Judah knew what was coming. The nation of Judah knew because they had seen Assyria takes these captives, takes them back to their land, draws pause for a minute, but then that machine of war is coming again. And Hezekiah knows this. And so we see that at the time of 2 Kings 18 and 19, that Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, is now geared up, and he's bringing that machine of war back to Judah. He's beginning to lay siege to their cities and taking them one by one. So that's kind of the backdrop of what's happening at this time. So as we get into this story, what we see happen here is that Sennacherib sends his lead commander of his army, and an envoy and soldiers arrive at Jerusalem. They've been laying siege to a city called Lachish, and they basically encamp outside of Jerusalem, and they go to an envoy that Hezekiah sends, and they basically begin to wage psychological warfare against them. They begin to tell them things like, do you really think that your God's going to save you? Have you seen what we've done? Have you seen what we've done to other nations? You think Egypt's going to save you? Egypt is a broken reed. So they're just essentially psychological warfare, talking trash to the envoy of Hezekiah, the men that Hezekiah sent to speak to these men, and they're threatening them, and they're saying, we are coming, and you cannot stop us. And so they're outside of Jerusalem, and as they're speaking to these men, the men say, why don't we speak in Aramaic so that people around can't hear what you're saying? Because they're concerned about the people, right? They say, no, we're going to speak to you in Hebrew. And so they're saying these things near the wall where people can hear, and the people are afraid. And so what happens in this story is, as you read further into 2 Kings 18, is that these men then retreat back, and they go to Isaiah, distraught over the things that are being said. The Syrians are saying they've come to destroy Jerusalem. Isaiah says, don't worry. These men are going to leave. And they're going to pull up and they're going to leave. Well, what happens is, in fact, they do. But they could not take strength from that for the moment, because what happens is they've only retreated for a moment. The men had heard that King Sennacherib had pulled away from Lachish. They go to join him, but they're coming back. So if there was a moment here where Hezekiah and his people thought, okay, what Isaiah said is true, they've left. They quickly realize and are shaken by the fact that Sennacherib sends a letter to Hezekiah. He sends a letter and he said, oh no, I've not left. I'm coming back. And you're not stopping us. And again, the mockery of, do you think your God is going to save you? No other nation has had their God save them from this army that we have. And you will be no different. And he even then has told them through some of the psychological tactics to the people, why don't you just come with us? You come with us to our land, and you will be able to drink from your own cistern. You'll be able to have eat from your own vine, your own fig tree. Things will be okay if you just go with us. He was trying to break them down. But it wasn't working. And so what we see is we get into this letter that Sennacherib has sent to Hezekiah. Hezekiah is broken over this. He doesn't know what else to do because he thought they were gone. But Sennacherib sends this letter and says, we're coming back, and we're coming back with a vengeance. And so what we find here is in this passage, let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 19, or excuse me, 2 Kings chapter 19. Hezekiah doesn't know what else to do, so he takes the letter and he goes into the temple and he spreads the letter out before the Lord. And he comes before God and doing the only thing he knew to do. Verse 10 says, verse 19, chapter 19, verse 19, he says, now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand so that all kingdoms of earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. So after Sennacherib threatens him, says, your God's not going to save you, Hezekiah goes into the temple, he lays this letter out before it, and he goes to God in prayer, and he gives us, God, you are the only one that can deliver us. Guess what happens? I know this story. The next day, the next morning, they wake up and they find 185,000 of the Assyrian army dead. Dead all around. They've died in the night. The angel of the Lord came and they struck the Assyrian army. Well, what does Sennacherib do? Can you imagine? He pulls up and he leaves. He leaves never to return. So what Isaiah said was true because they left. They would not return. Sennacherib had his legs cut out from under him in a sense because he was weakened. He was embarrassed it happened. And he never came back, never laid siege to Jerusalem. And in fact, a few years later, his own sons came in and assassinated him. He was weakened by this. He lost his strength by this. And so God delivered Judah in a mighty way in the events of 2 Kings chapter 19. Because of the faith and the strength of Hezekiah, this happened. All right, so when we think about Psalm chapter 46, Psalms chapter 46 verse 1 says, the Lord is our refuge and our strength. This is for the group now. I've kind of laid the backdrop of this story, but when we think about the word refuge, there are many other passages that are paired with this where we have examples and we see things where the word refuge is kind of illustrated to us in different ways. What do y'all think of when we think of the word refuge? What comes to mind? If the Lord is our refuge.
Safety.
Place of safety? I think about, when I was thinking about that, does anyone here, or did you, growing up, did you like to play hide and seek? I loved hide and seek. And do you remember thinking back when you knew that you really had a good hiding spot? Do y'all remember how that felt? Like and you're like, nobody's going to find me here. This is awesome. And how secure you felt in that. And I thought about that as I was thinking about this word refuge and about shelter. That it's kind of like that when you're a kid, where you feel like, I'm safe here. What else? What other words or thoughts come to mind when we talk about the word refuge? Can you think of some other illustrations about what it could mean? Okay, a place to be safe. Place of peace. Okay, very good.
Well, I think of it being a place when every, not just a place of safety, but when everything is going wrong and there is, problems against you. It's not like you're just going to go and hide away from things, but it's really bad. And the refuge is, a spot where I don't have to worry about all this stuff that's going on around me or whatever is happening, bad.
Yeah.
I'm in my spot.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like the hide and go seek game.
Yeah.
We had a few years ago, we've actually had this happen to us twice at Disney World. I don't know why, but we were at Epcot one day And I always said, like, we were down, we were like in the backside where all the countries are, and we were over by the canal. And I promise you, it literally felt like a thunderstorm, like, looked around the corner and was like, okay, they're not, and literally came around the corner. Like, we didn't even know it was there. And all of a sudden we're like in this massive thunderstorm. We're near France, and I remember looking, and the only thing that we had, I should have had a picture of this. The only thing that we could find to go and take shelter under were like these little bitty, like, street vendor umbrellas. You know what I'm talking? They're like, I mean, they're terrible. And the wind was blowing, raining cats and dogs, sheets of rain, wind, and we look over there, and these umbrellas are basically crumbling, and you're trying to go and get, there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to take refuge. And I think about that in that moment. That's what we needed. We needed something to cover us. We needed something to give us protection and shelter. We did not get it. And so we all went back to the hotel, and we spent about an hour wringing out our clothes, trying to dry out our shoes, because there was nowhere to go. So when we have a place of safety, a place of refuge, we really appreciate it in those moments, even in those types of moments, but then especially in moments where we need to draw spiritual strength. We have to remember that is what God is being for us, just as he was for Hezekiah. What we're going to talk about as we get more into Psalm 46 is that phrase that he is ever present. He is an ever-present help. And what that means, that he's around us constantly. He's always there to help us and strengthen us. Are there other thoughts that come to mind when we think about the word refuge?
I think given where we live, with storms, things like that, to me, when there is a storm, tornado, or whatever, and you're in that shelter, to me, there's an idea of hope, right? When everything's in chaos around you, and you're in that spot, it gives you hope, right? If we had no hope, if we were in a tornado and a shelter doesn't provide us that safety, there's no hope for us to be there.
Yeah.
So I always think about spiritually that when things are rough, God's my refuge because he's my hope, because I know he'll take care of me, and there'll be that future.
Yeah, like we can withstand. We can withstand. And I love that Psalms 46, and we're going to read through this in a moment. But I also love what it says as a follow-up to verse 1 and verse 2, because it says, because God is our refuge and our strength and our ever-present help in trouble, therefore we will not fear. We will not fear, though the earth give way. We're going to get into those verses. But I love that's we understand who God is. We understand how he's providing for us, and he's making provision for us through that. And we will not allow ourselves to become afraid. And we're going to be strengthened in that moment. Here's a few different examples of the meaning or different ways that refuge is used there. We see in Psalms 18, verse 2, that it's like a rock, that he hides us. And I think about that song, that he hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. So that's a sense in which God provides refuge for us. A shield. Psalm 18, he is as a shield to us. And I think about that as well as thou, O Lord, are a shield about me. We have these things are always captured and conceptualized in some of the songs that we love so much. A tower. I like that one. There's a song, You Are My Strong Tower, by a Christian band. And I like that image. When Hezekiah came in and he was trying to reestablish the proper type of worship in Judah, in 2 Kings 19, it says that there was never a king more holy and righteous than Hezekiah. One of the things that he did is he came in and he began to tear down the high places, the towers that people had built to worship false gods. And I love this analogy and this contrast to thinking of that God provides refuge as a tower, but he himself is that tower, not something that we just look at and think you are an image of a God that we worship. No, he is that tower for us. He provides that. How does a tower provide refuge and safety? if we were being attacked right now, we would want to be in an elevated place, right? We would want that high ground where we could protect ourselves. And so that's what God becomes for us, is He is that tower that we go to. A few other examples here. We've already talked about shelter, Psalm 31. He provides refuge as if with wings. Think about that image of like a swan, a mother hen, something that can take in those that they love and provide that extra. It's not only protection, but it's warmth. It's a feeling that we know that a mother hen, her chicks would know she is right there. I'm surrounding you with that warmth and protection, but I'm here. And then finally, maybe my favorite one is a fortress. That God provides refuge like a fortress. I like that imagery. I'm sort of like a run through the wall kind of guy. So like things like that kind of fire me up, thinking about that God is our strong fortress. And I couldn't help but think of the story and thinking about Jerusalem and how we're talking about the prayers that Hezekiah prayed that God would protect he and the nation of Judah, and specifically Jerusalem, in those moments when Sennacherib's army was bearing down. I can't help but think about the story of how David took Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 5. And I love this story. You know, when they came in and the children of Israel took the land, there were some remnants that remained. They didn't get everyone. And one of those was the Jebusite city Jebus, which became Jerusalem. And I love the story of how when David became king, you know, one of the primary things that he did to truly establish his kingdom was he went to that city and he took it. And it says that he called it a Jebusite fortress, a stronghold. And David went with his men, and David took that city, and David made that city become the city of David. And he established that as his capital city, and where he would have his palace, where he would live. But so that idea of that city, it even started from that. It was a stronghold that David took for the nation. And so here now, God is providing that to them while they're in that city. He was that stronghold. All right, let's look at a little bit in chapter 46 and kind of read through a couple of these verses. If I could have someone read that for us, we're going to just read through and look at a little bit of the extra illustration that the author of this psalm is making. Again, thinking of it as a national hymn and thinking about it in the context of this salvation of Israel from the Assyrian army. Let's think about what this verse and these verses in this chapter have to say to us. Can somebody read verses 2 and 3?
Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling.
Okay, so what we see here, there's a little bit of a building up here, right? We're talking about reasons and situations where because God is in our corner, because He's providing us with refuge and strength, that we're not going to fear. But then it begins to get rough, right? That these images, this illustration here, saying, well, even if the mountains fall into the sea and waters are roaring and foaming, like there's a apocalyptic kind of imagery here about like this is getting rough. Are we sure that we're not going to fear in these moments? The mountains are quaking. And so we see that in our minds, this tells us this is chaos, this is disaster, these are serious events. And yet in that, God remains not only a refuge, but a source of comfort. Look at the next few verses, verse 4 and 5. Can somebody read that for us? Psalms 46, verses 4 and 5.
There is a river whose streams make glad with the city of God, the holy dwelling places of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She will not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns.
All right, so look at how it brings it back. That with the chaos that's ensued, with mountains crumbling, quaking, with the water spraying foam, all of a sudden it brings it back to a place of tranquility. When we consider that there, as it says here, there are streams that make glad the city of God. And there's a couple of things that brings to mind. One is Revelation 22, where we think about the river of life that flows from the throne of God and how God is providing peace through that and security in a sanctuary. But there's also something interesting that's a tie-in back to Hezekiah's time related to the rivers of life that flow, that protect. And that is related to Hezekiah's tunnel. Does anyone here, do you know what Hezekiah's tunnel is? Some have heard. So imagine that in the years that Assyria has taken Israel, Israel's fallen. As I said, the kingdom of Judah had to know that Assyria was coming back. They were going to every nation, every city, every fortified town, and they were one by one. They were advancing upon them. They were taking them over. Those cities were falling into ruin. In that 8 or so years after Israel fell, Hezekiah had to know that was going to happen. And one of the things he did was extremely interesting. And you can find a lot of really interesting material on this, but he dug a tunnel. The lesson brings out a really good point that many of the great cities in the world are known for the rivers that flow through them. You have the Seine River in Paris, the Thames River, the Danube in Vienna. You have the Potomac River in Washington. You know, there's a lot of cities that you think about and you think there's a river that runs right through that city. Jerusalem was different. Jerusalem was arid and dry. There wasn't a river there, but what Jerusalem had was a spring, a wellspring of water, the Gihon spring, that came up and provided for that city. Well, one of the things that Hezekiah did, hopefully you can see it on the map here. Here's the Gihon spring, right near one of the walls. What he did during this time to provide for this city of Jerusalem was essentially to shore up their water resources in the event that they were attacked. In the event that a nation like Assyria would come in and lay siege to this city, he wanted to make sure that they had water. And so what he did was he set about to essentially create an engineering marvel by having 2 teams of engineers that went in and they dug into where the Gihon spring, where the source of that, and they start on that end and they go to the other end 1,725 feet away, and they began digging a pool and a tunnel from the spring down to the pool where it would gather the water, and underneath the ground it would draw that water from that spring and place it in a reservoir where the people would have access to that water within the walls of the city. So even under siege, they would have access to water and therefore life. And what was amazing is it said that with 2 teams going from each direction, they somehow met. Almost 100 feet under the mountain there, under the city of David, those 2 engineering teams met, and that channel, that tunnel of water formed that carried the water from the Gihon spring down to the pool of Siloam and provided that reservoir. So when we think about this story, there's a picture of it in fairly modern times. They say, I guess you can go there and you can actually walk in, wade into the tunnel underneath the mountain. So that's a really cool thing. I actually would say I wouldn't mind doing that one day. So, but you think about the context of this with what was happening with Sennacherib, and then you think about what it says in Psalm 46, where it says, "There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God." So think about this being a national hymn in reference to that. What kind of image that would evoke of how there truly was a life-giving river that formed in that city that through engineering feat, amazing feat, was going to provide life. So again, another idea there that told them that there was salvation with the things that had happened. And so as we go further in this, we see chapter 46, verse 10. Let's go ahead and read from verse 6, though. Verse 6 says, "Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. And then verse 10, a verse that we're very familiar with, where he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So be still and know that I'm God. So in this verse, when we think about that, in this moment, when we think about drawing strength from God, when we think about that he is our refuge, why is it so important? Or what is it saying when he says, be still? Why would we need to be still? How can we be still?
I think it means quit trying to take care of it yourself. You know,
Yeah,
know that God has got it in control, and you know, just be still and you know, lean on Him and quit trying to figure it out yourself.
yeah, definitely. Jason?
It reminds me of Exodus 14, where children of Israel coming out of Egypt, in front of them, they've got a big body of water, and behind them they've got Egyptian army. So in their minds, they came out here to die. You know, they were led out here out of slavery just to die here in this precarious moment. And God basically tells them, well, Moses tells them, God will fight for you. You have only to be silent. And I connect these two passages together. And I think kind of what Ms. Gill was saying. And in their minds, they had two scripts. Either one we were killed by the Egyptian army or we drowned. And God had a very different script in mind. I think that's very true for us as well. Sometimes we react to life based solely on what we know, what we see, what we think can be done.
Yeah.
And God says, listen, your ways are not my ways. Be still.
Yeah, very good. I heard recently, I was reminded of this, and I try to remember this like in with my work, because I'm probably bad about doing this. It says we tend to overestimate what we can get done in a month and underestimate what we can do in a year. And I'm like, well, okay, that's probably true for me. And then I thought that really is kind of a similar analogy in this context. We tend to overestimate what we can do on our own, I think, many times, and we tend to underestimate the power of God in our lives to help us through those things. Jason?
That phrase, be still, literally means cease striving. And so I think that encompasses what you're saying, that it's all our doing. Cease, stop striving.
Yeah.
On your own.
Quit trying to work your own plan and allow God to help shape that and to be there. Yeah.
We don't stop. Sometimes we get ourselves confused about the fact that we accomplished it with God's help, instead of the fact that He accomplished it with us sometimes stumbling into the way. And I think that's part of what Gail was saying.
Mm-hmm.
We really do. We have to stop so that we can give the credit to the right person instead of looking at it as maybe we accomplished something.
Yeah, very, very true. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I think, and I don't mean this in an ugly kind of way, dear. No, but like the be still, I think part of that concept is we have to listen to God. You know, it's kind of like with two people, you know, and
Two random people.
and you know, you're working on something, but one doesn't listen. You know, that they're going ahead and doing things like. You know,
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And but sometimes I just think we need to just stop and listen to God. I mean, we don't really even ask Him. You know, we don't really try to find out what is it. What is your will here? What is it you want me to do? What do I need to be doing right now? You know, and we just don't listen to Him. You know, and He may be giving us some. You're so sweet. Anyway, he may be giving us some pointers, but because we're not listening, we don't hear it.
Yeah.
And, you know.
And sometimes we're not still because we are afraid,
That's true.
right? I think it's so key that we think about where verse 2 says, therefore I will not fear. I'm not going to fear. But many times we are running because we are afraid and we don't know. And so instead of just stopping and kind of planting and saying, as you said, like, Lord, I can't do this like you were here. Exactly. To me, it's like Hezekiah going in the temple. There was a lot of back and forth, right? Envoys to the army back. Isaiah, what do we do? Finally, he doesn't know anything else to do but take that letter in from Sennacherib and just literally lay it before God. And just stop in that moment and say, I don't have anything else to do right now. I can't go anywhere else but right here, right now, and ask you for your help and your deliverance. Larry?
In the context of this conflict that we're talking about, it's kind of like God saying, in the midst of this conflict, lay down your weapons. I got this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in that conflict, it's hard to lay down your weapons.
Yeah. We always think we have to take action.
You have to take action.
Yeah, we always do.
Well, and I think too, Hezekiah, I mean, he totally, utterly, completely submitted himself to God. And I think that's, because he was just, he didn't have anything else he could do. And I think sometimes we see that as a weakness, and we will not, or do not, just fall on our face and say, Father, I do not know, help me. I do not know what to do here.
Mm-hmm.
But we feel like that's a weakness on us if we do that, or if we take that attitude.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is. I mean, anyway, just a thought.
No, good thoughts. I had a couple of things I put up there that are related to this, but then there was a couple of things that I was like, well, when we stop one thing, when we're still, if we think about that we're ceasing something, there's always something that we can start doing in that moment. So being still is stop fretting, stop fearing, stop running, stop trying to do it all on our own, But there are things we start. And I added these here. We start reflecting. We reflect on God. We reflect on what He can do for us and what He is for us in our life. And then we start observing around us. Like in those moments, we start observing and we think, where has God saved? What have I seen Him do that's mighty? Because we know that those things are there and we can find those things. And so in those moments, when we're being still, we're not just doing nothing. We're drawing our strength by reflecting and observing and recognizing what God has already done for us, what He's done for others. So as we close out Psalm 46, we get to the final part of this hymn, this national hymn, where it says, the Lord Almighty is with us. And then I love this, the God of Jacob. Because think about how this is truly bookending this passage, Psalm 46. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And I love that. We started with that. We started with that He is our refuge and our strength. And then they end this psalm with, He is our fortress. So the closing thought here as we think about this is that whatever strongholds that we are holding on to, they pale in comparison to the fortress that God is. They pale in comparison to what God can provide for us. And so therefore, in those moments, we put away those strongholds and we do not fear because we know God is providing that strength for us in our lives. Any other thoughts on any of this? There's kind of a lot of material to cover going through 2 Kings 18 and 19. The narrative is important, I think, to just understand how extreme the events of that chapter were and how desperate Hezekiah must have felt to still go before the Lord. And then God's mighty deliverance in that passage is something. I think we have to fully understand what was going on to really understand the deliverance that He gave. And He can do that for us in our own lives if we'll let Him. Anything else? Thank y'all for your attention. Next time I teach, I may ask more questions because I know I did a lot of talking tonight, but appreciate your attention and your comments, and hope everyone goes out and has a great rest of your week.